Hello, my name is Nurin Willis, and this is the second episode of Cool Schools. I'm here to try to help any educators out there learn how to make their school a better, safer, more welcoming place for every single student. And I'm really excited for this episode because I'm bringing in my colleague who is a co-sponsor of GSA, good friend, and somebody who's really been a champion for all students. And she has a lot of wisdom and a lot that she can share. So I'm going to go ahead and let her introduce herself. All right.
Hi, thank you so much for that. My name is Amanda Al-Raba'a. I am currently an English teacher in South Carolina, but I have also taught in North Carolina and Ohio and Kazakhstan, and I am an out queer teacher.
All right. And very different out queer teachers, but I think that's part of what makes this work so well. So I guess we'll start with how we kind of met and started doing all of this. So my first year at our current school, it was also Amanda's first year. And so I saw queer kids. I walked in the door, saw queer kids and was like, oh man. And then saw that we didn't have a club. There was no way for them to have a particularly safe space. And this was not my first rodeo with that situation. So I asked some folks, figured out how to start a GSA, and got it started. And then lucky for me, Amanda reached out to me to help with the GSA, which was very necessary. I'm not an organized person, and I need, assistance. Amanda's much better at that. And we have managed to do some really incredible things at our school. And I think things that if you are a South Carolina educator may feel not possible at your school, but you would really, I think, be surprised because at the end of the day, all of us, all educators, I firmly do believe really want what's best for kids. And when you explain it to them in a way that makes sense, I think you get buy-in from the overwhelming majority of people, regardless of personal beliefs, right? Because that's our whole thing is regardless of personal beliefs, we're trying to do what's best for the kids based on the data, right? Education, data-driven, all of that stuff. This is what the data says, right? So we try to provide that support any way we can. That first year was a little chaotic though. Yeah. We did our best we had a lot of interest.
Yes, I think one of the cool things with our kids too is that we've gotten to grow with them because we started the GSA very much for them. And so, we have kids who we had since day one who are still with us. And that's what's informed so many of our conversations is, the first weeks we had with our GSA and what they needed and what they wanted to see and how they wanted to proceed. And I think a lot of that has stayed, and it's like we've gotten to grow with the kids into the GSA that we are now.
Yeah. I mean, because it takes time to build those relationships and to build that trust. Because I think you probably remember too, when we first asked our kids about homophobia and transphobia in the schools, they were like, it's not really much. But then once we got better relationships and we kind of asked again, they were like, oh yeah, no, it's a big problem. Because they just didn't feel safe. And even though we are out queer educators, very openly so, they still were not entirely sure that we were safe people to kind of share those things with. And I think that that's also one of those things that people need to recognize is that it does not matter who you are. And it is not a personal thing when kids are not sharing things with you right away. It's just, it takes time. Kids don't come out to us right away. They don't tell us things right away. Like, even though I have my pins and my, and so, yeah, it's like, you have to be patient, especially with the kids, but also with, coworkers, because it takes time and it's, we get our ideas about what is best for kids. And sometimes you need a little nudge to realize that maybe some of the things you thought were not, are not entirely correct,
Absolutely. And I think some of the things that are important are those visual signifiers like pins, flags, posters in the room, using inclusive language. Those things, even if sort of superficially to begin with, signal to kids that you're a safe person or at least have some idea of how to talk about those things. But, sort of like our GSA has grown and our kids have needed time to trust us, you have to wait to build those relationships. And kids might not always trust you at first, and that's okay. And they might have a different safe adult in the building, and that's also okay. It's not a reflection on you, it's the kids and what they need. And that's, I think, what we're always trying to tell teachers is talk to your students, ask your students, see what you can do for them, but also understand that you might not be that person for them, and that's okay.
Right. Yeah, I think sometimes it is hard for us to acknowledge that we might not always actually know what our kids need just because we're the teachers and the adults, and it in a sort of weird way, maybe it's just my ADHD brain, but it reminds me of the sort of things that I learned in Peace Corps and learning about international aid and development of like if you go in thinking you know what the problems are and how to solve them, you are likely going to either do nothing productive or actually harm, as opposed to, okay, whether or not I think I have ideas, I need to talk to these people and see, like what is it that these kids actually need? What is it that these kids actually want? What are they trying to do? And they don't necessarily know, like that's been one of our biggest challenges is like, what do you guys want to do? What do you guys want to do? Because it's a student-led group, our Gender and Sexuality Alliance is a student-led group. It is not meant for us to figure out exactly what they want. We're there to help them and to support them and to, provide resources and guidance and all that. But, it's like when you ask teenagers what they want, it can be a little tricky sometimes to get answers, and then even trickier to actually make the things that they want happen. So that's been a fun challenge that I guess is just familiar to anybody in schools, though.
It has. And I think last year they got a little bit more urgency with all of the legislation in Florida, particularly, but in the South in general. And I think last year was sort of a pivotal year for our GSA and kind of figuring out what kids want, and then also what some of our kids really need. And I know it's hard for a lot of schools to provide those things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because we know, like, how many times have we heard about the mental health crisis in youth in schools and all of those things? And I think that did add like a different sense of urgency in in our work and in our club for all of us, because we knew what was happening, even if the kids didn't know everything that was going on. And so it was like, okay, we know that there are these issues. We know that LGBTQ youth are the ones who are struggling the most. They're all struggling, unfortunately, but statistically, LGBTQ youth and kids in the demographic of our students in particular really have been struggling. And it's just like, okay, how do we support them? What are their issues, beyond just needing safe, supportive humans, adults, ideally, but and in real life, because Lord knows the internet, while it can be a place where they can, theoretically find people who are like them and who understand them, it's also not the safest place all the time for anybody, much less kids.
Yeah, for sure. It is. I mean, it's scary to be a queer teenager right now. They're more at risk for so many different kind of mental health issues and experiences, and lack of access to mental health care. Much higher risk for suicidal ideation. Much higher risk for a lot of things that we as teachers don't want to see them go through. And so I think our main goal with GSA is always to support those kids and to do whatever you can, again, like Willis said, regardless of your beliefs, is that's a child who is in your care, and it's your responsibility to support them however you can, whatever that looks like for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I think we know that having even one safe adult, even one affirming adult can be such a game changer for these kids. And a lot of times, I know we ran into this our first year, especially. There were so many adults who wanted to make sure that they were being a safe adult, but they didn't know how, like that was such a big challenge, because we said, hey guys, we've talked to the kids. They've said there's this issue, but the teachers were like, I don't I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. These kids are telling me all of these things and these pronouns and these sexual orientations I've never heard of. Like, I remember very first GSA meeting, a student said their sexual orientation, and I think it was maybe omnisexual or something, and I didn't know what that was. I was like,
sapiosexual, maybe.
Yeah, that was a good one too when we did the trainings. But it's like, even as very queer, very openly queer people who are, pay attention to what's happening in the world and pay attention to, best practices in queer culture, and I feel like both of us are online enough that we know a lot of things, but then we're not teenagers. And so what people our age are saying and doing is not the same thing. And so, they express themselves differently in a lot of ways. And that's been, it's been interesting, because I remember I found it so fascinating that when the students did identify themselves, because, we don't ask kids their gender identity or sexual orientation or anything. That is their business, whether they are there as an ally or they're out, not out. Unless they want to share it, we don't ask. But I remember a lot of our kids really wanted to share. And I remember being struck by how few students identified as just gay or lesbian. And I think, it's because they're trying things, they're experimenting, and they feel more comfortable existing in gray areas that I think, like, so many of us have been taught are not okay or don't exist, or all of that. Whereas it's like they love the gray. They're like, yay, I'm like everything all at once, And I think that's lovely. And I don't understand why folks feel like because there's no harm in it, right? Like, you find me an adult who didn't go through a phase in high school or middle school. They're not hurt. Are they like, I was emo in high school and it ruined me? You know what I mean? I was a goth, I was a goth. It's like these fond memories. So even if our kids are trying things on that change, we have kids whose pronouns and names and all of these things have changed from when we first met them. But you know what? They're healthy and they're happy. And that's what matters, is because the more you tell a teenager, you can't be queer, you can't be trans, you can't. Yeah, that's how you get teenagers to stop doing stuff. No, that's how you get them to dig in harder, But if you give them that space, they can go, oh, maybe this isn't for me, or maybe this is for me, or I was somewhat right, but maybe I need to move over here some. And it's a process. And I like to think that we give our kids that space to evolve and to change and to grow and be whoever they are and they decide they are,
And so many things that are so important for our GSA and for supporting kids, from what you just said. Like, they might not have the words for what they are, but that doesn't make them any less what they are. If they have the words or not, that's who they are. And then also, like Willis said, we are constantly learning new words and constantly messing up. I saw a kid today in my hallway who I called the name I generally know them by, and they're like, nope, going by this now. And I was like, okay, great, thank you, noted. And I think that's the other thing, is that people get really defensive or worried about messing up. We mess up daily.
All the time.
We just do. Everyone messes up. It's going to happen. You're going to mess up a pronoun or whatever. Are you still there? Do we need to pause?
Yeah. No, I'm here. You're good. Are you
good?
Oh,
okay. I lost you for a minute.
No, you're fine.
No, you froze and went away. But it's just, apologize and move on. And I think that is something that happens a lot especially with adults, is if you misgender a kid or use an incorrect name or a dead name, just, I'm sorry, correct and move on. I think that is one of the most important pieces of advice I can give, because if you misgender someone or misname them and then make it about you, then the onus is on that person to sort of assuage your guilt and make you feel better. And it's that person probably gets misgendered or dead named or called the wrong name a lot, and it's not something new. So just correct, move on, try not to make a big deal of it, I think would be a big piece of advice I have, especially for teachers who you know, are so empathetic and tend to want to apologize a lot to a kid or for something like that, I would say make it less of a deal than you think it needs to be, because it's, you know, you don't want to call that
Right.
child out.
Yeah, because I mean, it's like I get misgendered all the time, you know, and I get it, and I don't. You can tell the difference between I just kind of reacted, you know, I say girl, like people be like girl, and that doesn't bother me most of the time because, you know, it's like that girl, and I'm like, yeah. But if you make it a big deal, because one of the things I think a lot of people don't realize is when it's just like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, and you apologize profusely, you are putting them in that situation where they may feel like they need to say it's okay. And it's not necessarily okay. I mean, it's okay that you messed up. Everybody messes up. But yeah, just like you said, you just apologize and you move on because, yeah, you put them in an uncomfortable position. It makes it a big deal. And it does. It happens all the time. I guarantee you it happens all the time. And kids aren't out to everybody most of the time. So they probably use those pronouns or are called by those pronouns and that name in other contexts, whether they want to be or not. But you just expressing that willingness. And honestly, I think just saying, I believe you. You are telling me who you are, and I'm going to believe you because you know better than yourself or than anybody else who you are, you know. And I think that I'm very concerned about people who seem to think that young people don't know who they are. You know, hearing, you know, folks on school boards talking about that, you know, gay kids are just confused. And, you know, I've seen people saying that, you know, until you're in your 20s, you can't know, and your brain hasn't fully developed. And I'm just like, you know, I think about my dad recently telling me a story about how he remembers me being 3 years old, and I have one sister, and I told my dad there weren't supposed to be two daughters. I was 3. I didn't know, I didn't have a word for it. I didn't know there was a word for it. You know, I didn't think I was a boy, but I knew I wasn't a girl either. Um, and, you know, I was telling my parents over the summer that I think all my life growing up, I just considered like there were girls and there were boys, and then there was Nurin. I was my own category, you know, and
Which you
I
are.
was lucky. Yeah, right. But, you know, it's like, I think I was lucky. And it's funny because I grew up in South Carolina, but I feel like people just let me be. Like, and I think that maybe part of it is folks are kind of freaked out by kids asserting an identity as opposed to just kind of being, you know, it's like there's always, I'm sure there have been teachers who were like, oh yeah, that kid's, you know, got a lot of sugar in their tank, all those sort of Southern isms. Um, but kids didn't say it. And so it wasn't so much a thing. But now that kids are saying, no, I've realized this and I want to be recognized as such, people are like, no, you can't do that. I'm like, but why not though? Like, why can't we allow kids to just express themselves? And because that is what helps them learn and grow.